Well, welcome back to the Ropes Family Podcast. Here we're back. I know we promised a different episode this week, but it's going to be a little different because Courtney, I think they surprised their family with going to Disneyland.
Disney World.
Disney World.
Yeah, big
that's
one.
all the same to me. I don't really know
Yeah,
the
well,
difference.
one's East Coast, one's West Coast.
Oh,
So
sorry.
that's okay. I know people that love them. They know the difference.
Yeah.
My family loves them, so I better know the difference.
And isn't Christy and your girls?
Christy, a couple of them are going. Hopefully, it's not a surprise.
Oh.
No, it's not.
Well,
not. I'm kidding.
It'll be out tomorrow. So.
Yeah, that's right. No, they're leaving. Christy and Marissa are going out there Saturday for a few days to surprise Macy. Macy works at Universal. They know it.
Oh, Macy already knows?
Yeah, they know it. Yeah,
I could bleep that part out.
Yeah, no, they're good. They know everything.
Okay, well, I'm glad they know
good.
everything.
Yeah, we're good.
That's good. So this episode, instead of talking about family ministry, like what we promised last week, is I wanted to interview about pastoral ministry. We're just exploring all the different ministries or some of the big ministries that we do here at our church. And so I just had a couple questions for you, if you don't mind answering.
Shoot away. It's a big question. I mean, it really is. That's when you asked me if I would do this or however it came about. My mind started going to too big of places, and I was like, "This is not." Just
you can probably make a podcast series on just what this specific thing is. So, what is pastoral ministry?
Well, that's a good question. So, because you look to the passage that we go to, that Ephesians 4 passage where it says some are pastors and teachers. And that's kind of where, as I was thinking about going, that's the first place my mind went back when I took a class back at Wayland years ago. And we had this long discussion about pastors and teachers. Is it one? Is it two? Kind of a thing. And those are two different things altogether. Pastoral ministry, the word, in the Greek, it basically means leadership, oversight. Sometimes it has the word elder kind of attached to it, kind of a thing. And so it's somebody that leads. But if you look in most modern churches, when we talk about pastoral ministry, we talk about the care, the shepherding of, and so those are oftentimes two different things. And the way I run with it, I think my gifting, and I think that's what Paul is dealing with in that list in Ephesians. They're not offices. I wrote that in my notes. Are these offices or are they gifts? And these are gifting type things. And so I think one of the things that he's gifted me with is pastoral care, pastoral ministry. And that's, the shepherding aspect of pastoral care is, meeting people's needs, seeing the hearts of folks, and then, doing what you can to minister to them.
Yeah, so that's kind of how you would approach pastoral ministry.
Yeah,
right?
that's the way I do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's biblical, and I think it's definitely it's unique in the different settings. Here versus even Lubbock. A church here where we're in a small community. What's the city limit sign says
450 probably.
Yeah, something like that. And and we know it's more than that because people live out, but we're still, the Baptist church here, and we know there's other churches here that do this as well. But we're the ones that have full-time staff. And I hate the fact that that's what it kind of comes down to, but we're here. We're at a lot of different things. And so if there's a need, we usually get the call first, and then we try to let the others, if it pertains to another church in town, we try to make some connections there. But it's not just pastoral care. It's not just caring for the hearts of the Baptist in town. In Ropes, it's the care for the people that he's put here in this community, and so that's really what it comes down to, I think, for us, and that's the way I've tried to approach it.
Yeah, and I think that you kind of touched on a point. In small town churches, the pastor kind of does everything. Like, you have the pastoral care part of your job, the sermon prep part of your job, but you also have like you're my boss part of my job, part of
That's
your
the
job.
hard part. That is so hard.
Like you just and you have to. I mean, we are a committee led church, but you still kind of oversee all of
Sure.
that. I guess that's the overseer part.
It is, and that's the hard part. I mean, because that's definitely a part of the biblical office of pastor, or of elder, whatever, leading the church, is having that role of authority, and the hard part for me is so many people try to bring in secular models in, and I think I make a good Baptist because I'm reactionary. Baptists traditionally have been reactionary, and so whenever we see something, we always tend to act whatever the opposite way or whatever it may be, and so when people try to throw, secular models at the church and say, well, you need to be the CEO, you need to be whatever. I'm like, my natural inclination is to no, that kind of a thing. But there is that responsibility, and so I do have. In a lot of sense, the ultimate say over things.
Yeah.
One of the first things that you wanted to do was paint walls black, and I'm like, we're not. No,
we found one room in here that we could kind of do something close to black,
and that all that is that's experience. I've been in too many buildings, but anyway, that goes back to I did say no for the most part on that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I understood that was just kind of one of those like, and what do I know? What did I know 6 years ago, like about any of it? But and I've just kind of learned, and our congregation,
sure.
you're experienced, right?
Yeah,
so.
I guess, but I'm not saying black walls are bad. I'm just saying it in 10 years it does make things difficult, and so I try to see. Part of my role is to not just see the now; it's to see what future. May happen. Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
So, in this, I mentioned sermon prep, and I think that's something that not a lot of people know. Like you definitely work more than just Sunday mornings, right? Maybe it's some other days.
Every once in a while, yeah.
But I think I asked you this one time, but I want to hear it for our podcast and our podcast listeners. How long does it take to prep a sermon, and what is your process on that?
This is shifted and changed to some degree over the years. So my process typically is there's a couple of different ways you can do sermons. People do topical sermons. People do what I would say scripturally based. Not that topical is not scripturally based, but I think if you go at a topic, it's easier to kind of pick and choose the scriptures that fit with your topic. But if you go with a scriptural based or biblical based or whatever, then you're trying to let the text, the Bible, be the one to guide where you kind of go. And so, and that's I lean in that direction, even though I do series, and the main reason I do various series is to kind of give me some direction, because it's it's easy with the things that we have going on in our world to time gets away from you, and all of a sudden, if I don't have a plan on Monday morning with where Sunday's going to be, then all of a sudden it's Friday. And and so that's kind of why I do series, whether it's a book, or whether right now I'm doing about three series that I've kind of staggered out, but I know where they're going, and I'm basically teaching a biblical text that I've kind of put underneath this sermon series title or whatever. But my process, so I was told one time that it should be 1 for 1. 1 hour for every minute you speak, 1 hour of preparation for every minute you speak.
Yeah.
And I know in reality that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah. How long are your sermons? 30 minutes, 45 minutes?
No.
An hour and a half?
Hour and a half. Yeah. I always aim for 18 minutes, and I usually go 26 minutes or something like that.
So you should, going with that, like if you should spend half of your 40-hour work week prepping for your sermon.
So, and I don't. I mean, actually,
slacker.
I know I am. So I don't sit down. When I talk about prep time, the way I prep versus what other people prep is, I mean, we're all different in our study habits and all those kind of things. Like, so what I'm doing this year, I've tried to do things a little different for 2025. So I know where I'm going with my sermons, and so when I get to the office on Monday morning after we do our men's breakfast, I sit down and I read the Bible passage, whatever it is that I'm teaching. This week it's on Matthew chapter 9 or whatever it is, Matthew. It's Matthew's calling, and so I read that, and I read it, and I already know where I'm going with it. I mean, not going with it, but I know that's the passage that I'm going to be doing, and so I make sure I know what it's about, what is in there. What did Matthew say? What did Luke say about it? What did Mark say about it? John doesn't say anything about it, and so, but I make sure before I jump into anything else, I want to make sure I know what the Bible passage says. So, so I spend time doing that, read the context, what is taking place, and then
and you get that from commentaries, or
that's
just Bible part?
just the Bible part.
Okay.
So I make sure I do that first, because when I break open a commentary, I'm getting somebody else's opinion on it, and hopefully it's a scholarly opinion. Hopefully they know what they're talking about. I'm pretty picky and choosy with my resources, but so once I kind of have a good idea of what I think the passage says, and this is important to me, I think this is what I want to grab a hold of and bring Sunday morning. Then what I've been doing this year is I'll pull. I've got probably every study Bible that's been written, kind of a thing. And so I'll sit in my chair, and I've got a stack of about 10 of them. And then I sit there and I read all of the notes that each one of them, and about 3 or 4 of them are all similar. And some of them are off the wall. I'm like, well, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, kind of a thing. But I still want to give them the credit, because, for the most part, they've done some legwork. So I do that. And then once I've read through that and read through the notes, and I usually throw them into a Word document. What if I read something that's significant, I'll put it into the Word document, and then I'll break open a couple of commentaries, and then I'll read through those. And so my goal is by Tuesday to have read everything that I'm going to read and have them down on paper. And then Tuesday afternoon, I highlight out of all of those notes, I highlight the ones that I think this deserves to be considered to make the sermon. That's kind of what I do. Hopefully I have an outline by Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and then the rest of the week I'm either sitting down, dumping stuff in, taking stuff out, but my brain knows where I'm going. I'm a big acronym kind of a guy, and so I put a word together because it's a good teaching tool. And so if usually like this week. So Jesus calls Matthew. Matthew, he says, "Follow me." Matthew follows him, and then the next thing we know, they're having a meal with sinners, tax collectors, all of that kind of stuff. And so I'm in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I don't want this to be a 45-minute sermon. I want it to be shorter, so I don't want to pick a 5-letter word. I want to pick a 3-letter word this week. And so that's the way my brain works. Okay, and so.
And just to kind of give clarity with this too, like you're not just sitting down for 20 hours.
20, no.
Like you are doing this like in between all of the other pastoral things you've got going on.
Yeah, like for example, last night we had basketball games here. It was senior night. I'd already done my reading. I was trying to get ahead this week. I'm trying to just use my time better, whatever. And so last night when I got to the basketball game, I had already done all my commentary reading. I'd already had my outline 3/4 of the way done. I knew what my word was, and I knew what my major points were. So I'm taking pictures, but I'm thinking about point number 1 is this. And so I'm just letting my brain work, and it's not just my brain. I hope behind all of this, God's Spirit's the one that, to not make this just a secular way of writing a paper kind of a thing. I hope that the more I'm absorbed into the Bible and I'm thinking about it, I think God's Spirit works in that process. And so that's what I'm thinking about. I'm amazed at how many times I'll be laying in bed and just sitting there, and it's a Thursday. And so I'm thinking, okay, this is where I am in my message. And I go to bed and Christy's asleep, and I'm laying there and I'm thinking through my outline, and I'll think, oh, that.
Yeah.
And If I'm smart, I'll make a note. Because too many times I'm like, what was that I thought about last night?
Yeah.
So I'll get up and I'll walk in there and I'll grab my phone and I can open up the document and I'll just put a note in there to remind myself of
This is what I thought
This
at
is
2
what
a.m.
at 2 a.m. Yeah. And so, but I think it's important that I try to live with it for a few days or whatever it may be, because it gives God's Spirit, I think, the time to say that's a dumb idea.
Yeah.
He does. I mean, there have been times I'll get up there on a Sunday morning and I think this is going to be good. They're going to be wowed with this one. And then first of all, I'm reminded that Donovan, if they're wowed by what you say, then you're missing the point. But
good point.
Yeah, but it's one of those things. I think God's Spirit works in the process, and so I listen to a lot of things. I listen to people's prayers. And there's a running joke among the deacons. I'll make this comment: good prayer, good prayer. And anyway, and I do it with us too.
You've done that on the podcast once.
Oh, okay. There we go. But I listen to what people say when they pray, and I'm blessed to have people pray for me. And they'll get up and it'll be the offertory prayer, and they'll say, "Give Donovan the words," And my prayer is that all of the preparation I've done was God giving me the words, and then when I'm up there speaking, whether I'm using a manuscript or an outline or whatever it may be, that in the moment, if God says, don't say that, or here's something that you left, and so that's my prayer, that all of my preparation is just to make me in touch with what God's Spirit's going to lead me to say at that 11:25 hour moment whenever I get up there.
And I think that's a big thing is you're not so concerned. Well, you're concerned about what you say, but you are more in tune with the Spirit and making sure the Spirit is what you're communicating. And you're not going to stick to your manuscript if God says do something else.
Yeah. I hope.
Yeah.
I hope that really is my goal. My sermon last week was, I really, whether anybody else got one thing out of it or not, to me, last week's sermon really was for me as the pastor, which is interesting that we're doing this because there's a point I preached out of 2 John, and he says, don't even give a greeting to these teachers that are coming in with bad doctrine. And so I was really challenged by the fact that you and I, we as a church, leaders in the church, we represent God, and when we speak, people really do take our words as truth. And that's a sobering thing to think about.
For real.
Yeah. And so, when I said that last week, do we as a church, do we extend our greeting to teachers that are false or even mediocre, not mediocre, because Paul says, I didn't come with eloquent words or whatever. I came speaking the truth. So it's not eloquence necessarily, but it's the truth, and so do we take that seriously, and do we guard who we are as a church and just open the doors to anybody? Yeah.
And that's part of the shepherding part of your role that you play here, for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, I know, that was probably a long time, unless you're really interested in what I do. That was probably way more than what you want. But
and so that's only part of what you do. You know, like you could spend hours talking about the process of that, but that's only part of your job here.
Sure. Right? And that's, that's the blessing of being in a small town, is to have multiple responsibilities, but at the same time, it's also a struggle. I've got friends that are pastors at larger churches where they don't make hospital visits. I mean, they've got somebody on staff that does that. They don't
a pastoral care pastor.
Yeah, and so I think about is that a blessing? And maybe that's goes back to why I think especially this Ephesians 4 passage is more of a gifting passage than it is an office explanation, because I do think one of my gifts is the ability to go in and make visits and to relate. Relating's not necessarily that important, but to be empathetic
Yeah.
maybe, and to listen and to see the needs that are there. Because, our community has been through the ringer over this past year, but in the past 4 years, there's been stuff going on that's just been it's been hard. And I remember that when the last one happened, and I got the phone call that this event had taken place. I remember thinking, when are we going to get a break?
Yeah.
When are we going to get a break? And then I remember thinking at the same time, man, I'm thankful that I get to be a part, even though this family, they're not a part of they weren't a part of our church. They're not, that kind of stuff, but we still have contact with them. But I get the opportunity to go in a horrible situation, and I get to minister to them, and you get to hope and pray that God's going to open a door so that they understand what really is important, and that's the love of Christ, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I think about the pastors that I know that all they do is preach. They don't get that struggle, but they don't get that joy, kind of a thing. So
They also, that builds rapport. I mean, that's not like the biggest part of the goal, but like people love you. They see you as a pastor, and they love you, and you have the rapport in their eyes, the ability to go and meet them in their worst times or in their best times. You have that with them, because of that caring heart that you have in that role.
Thank you. I was in my mind. I diffuse tense situations by comedy.
Yeah.
And I was going to make whether I'm a good comic or not. I was going to give you a hug. Go give me a hug. That's so sweet. But that's my defense mechanism for that kind of thing. So anyway, yeah.
So I have a couple questions in here, but I'm gonna flip them.
Okay.
So I want to get some of your free thoughts on pastoral ministries. So you've kind of mentioned the Ephesians 4 passage, but what makes, in your eyes, in your opinion, in your biblical knowledge opinion, what makes a good pastor? Kind of what we talked about already.
Yeah.
See if you had any more thoughts on that.
So, it's the way I look at it is I've been really blessed to have served under some really great men, and I think about my pastor that was in Alaska, and he was a great guy. I was young. He was patient beyond patient. He was just
sounds familiar.
Yeah, and so I was really blessed to have served under him, and he was a good preacher. I've really he recorded on cassette tapes his sermons, and I've tried for several years. I want to just hear his voice. I want to hear that kind of. But he was a good man. I didn't know anything at the time, but I look back now, and I'm thankful for him and for the leadership that was there. And then from there, I went to Millshoe, and served along Stacy Connor, and so what makes a good pastor? What makes a good, all of the things that are wrapped into it. I think about those two guys, and then. Went to Arlington, served under a couple of different men there. Went to Highland, served under a great man there. It's hard to just say one thing. Every one of them brought strengths, and every one of them had weaknesses. And so I think it's more of a compilation of what I've seen through these guys, and the way prep time. Prepping for sermons. It's coming out of youth ministry. That's
my next question.
Yeah. Well, that was the hardest thing, because there are some things, when I was young, and I used to think I could pastor. I mean, I guess every youth minister that I've ever known has had that thought. I could do that. And then stepping into that role, I realized what an ego that was, because there are similarities. You love on people. You try to preach the truth. You try to, live your life right, all of those kind of things. But it's a different animal. It really is. And probably most youth ministers could do it. They could.
So that's my next question. So you were a youth pastor for what, 30 years?
23, yeah.
Sorry,
That's all right.
aged you.
I
23
just
years.
became
So
70.
you're a youth pastor for 23 years, and now this is as a senior pastor. What's the difference and what's the carryover? Like you said, loving people and meeting people where they are. That's the carryover.
Yeah.
But what are some big things
The families, obviously ministering to families is important. The knowing God's word, to me, the struggle that most ministers have is staying deep in God's word. I mean, it really is. Everything that we do should be grounded in some aspect of the truth.
Let the word of Christ dwell within you richly.
Yeah. I think that's it in the Bible.
Colossians 3:17.
Yeah.
I'd probably say it every podcast.
Yeah, and so
3:16, not 17.
Come on.
17 is good too, though. Sorry.
Yeah. Is this about youth ministry or pastoring? I'm kidding. Yeah, but I think to me that really is at the heart of what we do is knowing what God's word says, and being able to convey it in such a way, whether it's to teenagers or to adults or if Courtney was here, to children and to those families. It's letting God's word be the thing that we're conveying, because He really is the one that's going to make a change. If I get up and preach, I could be the most eloquent person in the world, but if God's Spirit's not the one that draws a person, man, I just wasted my breath, kind of thing. And speaking of, I guess, preaching, since we've been talking about that, I've been amazed. On a Sunday, I'll think, that was a good one. I didn't mess that up. That kind of thing. And part of what I do after a sermon is I try to evaluate what made it good or bad. And I try not to let people's opinions sway me too much, but there are people make comments. They just, it's inevitable. They're going to make comments about things. And rarely, if ever, have I finished a sermon where in my mind I thought nailed it. People, they don't say a word. I mean, very rarely. But there are times when I'm like, thank the Lord that is over.
Yeah.
That was, I could not have butchered that any worse. And I'll have people for 2 weeks. Man, what you said, it's
a great sermon.
Yeah. I'm just like, but it goes back to the reminder that if God's Spirit is not the one that's impacting somebody and drawing them to Christ through the word, through the truth, then it's pointless. I mean, it's really a tough, so that's just, I try, as the difference between being a youth minister and a pastor, it really does go back to knowing God's word, conveying it in truth, and just praying that I would get out of my own way and let, I'm a tool that He's going to use. I've got to be in there, but you just pray that it's not me making the change in somebody's life, that it's God's Spirit doing it. That's just the key.
And I mentioned that in the that's something I've picked up from watching you, but I mentioned that in the last week's podcast, in the youth ministry podcast. Have you listened to it?
I haven't listened to that one yet. Sorry.
I figured you did.
Oh, you have a podcast? I'm kidding. Yeah.
So I mentioned the passage in Corinthians where Paul is saying, I planted the seed, but Apollos watered it. Yeah. But God is the one who made the seed grow. It's just being faithful in whatever we're doing. If we're planting or if we're watering the seeds, God's going to do it. And then that's important to remember. It's not us doing the change. It's not us, not the words we say necessarily, but it's the Spirit of God moving in the people that are here.
Has to be. Yep.
So you've been the pastor at this church almost 10 years, like next week, right?
I think something like that, yeah.
Almost 10 years. So I just kind of want to ask a couple of things. What has been the hardest part of being the pastor at this church? I know that's kind of a hard question to answer, or maybe the hardest, or what's been hard about transitioning from youth ministry to senior pastory or pastorate or whatever,
Oh, good night. So it's probably the weight of it, and I'm not sure that's a legit thing to even say, but it is, there's a weight behind it, what we do as the pastor. You want to lead in the direction that you're supposed to go in. My goal is whenever God tells me to go, whatever it is, that I would first of all listen.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be here longer than what He wants me to be. And so, but the weight of it of being faithful day in, day out. I made reference last week of my sermons for the last Sunday of each month are going to be the Bible passages that I haven't talked about, over the past 10 years or whatever. And so I've preached 450 or plus sermons. And the weight of being biblically accurate and the way that comes across, just, I don't know, everything about it, I think, can have the potential to be heavy, if I let it, which I do sometimes.
Sometimes that's what you need is to have that weight to get the fire going underneath you.
Yeah. But at the same time, to understand that in 100 years, if the church is still here doing what God calls it to do, I'm going to be a name on a piece of paper. I mean, that's what it's going to come down to.
Yeah.
They're not, they may be able to look back and hear a sermon. Who knows? It may be like my pastor. They're going to go, I wish we had the way to listen to that guy. Who knows? But all that's going to matter in 10 years or whatever, and I need to remind myself of this, is God still the one that's working and drawing people to Him? If nobody remembers our name in 10 years, but God is growing and building things out of what we've done, then that's a success. And that really does take the weight off. I mean, I'm supposed to be faithful. That's a heavy burden. But at the same time, it's really not it's up to me to be faithful, but it's up to God to do His part, which is the hard stuff.
I definitely understand the weight. Maybe, and my weight is a lot different than yours, obviously, but but I feel the weight of youth ministry, and so I can only imagine, the weight of the entire church on top of it. I understand that weight. I'll see a kid walking across the street and I'm like, have I talked to that kid?
Yeah.
When's the last time I did? How is that kid doing? And I can only imagine it's the same with you, just the weight of have I been an effective minister to that family,
Yeah, well, that's, we talked about what our community's been through, with people passing away and whatever age they may be. And I know this is, anyway. The question I always ask myself, is, did God give me an opportunity to share Christ with that person before this moment? I mean, it doesn't matter. The last person was a teenager. Before that, it was an adult. Before that, it was, it's just, you go back. Did God give me an opportunity, and did I miss it? That's the hardest question. If a couple splits up, if a couple's getting married, if a couple is struggling, did God give me an opportunity to share His love and His truth in a way that might impact whatever it is that they're going through? That's a heavy weight but it's also, I think, a sobering, back to the word sober.
Yeah.
It's a good one to remind me of what I'm here for and what we are here for. God brought us to Ropes for that purpose, to speak His truth and to impact these families and these people. And I said this to, I think, to the teenagers whenever that young lady passed away not too long ago. A lot of folks know me as a photographer. And if at the end of the day, all they know me as is a photographer, and they don't know that that's just something that I do, and they don't know that I represent Christ, I've failed miserably. And so that's the hope, is that God can use those tools, those interests, whatever it may be, to give me an open door to speak His love and His truth into people's lives. And so,
that could definitely be the hardest thing about being a pastor, is the weight. So what has been the best thing about being the pastor here at Ropes?
Probably
working with the youth pastor.
Working with the youth pastor,
cool.
it just doesn't get any better than that. It has to be the relationships. I mean, it really does. Like I said, our community is growing. Baptized that young man on Sunday, Jet Blair, and just to be able to do that, and I stand there in the waters, and he's coming down, and you look out, And dang it, I was
That's
not going
okay.
to get emotional.
That's all right.
I always used to laugh at old pastors. Those old guys always get emotional, and here I am. But just to sit there and man, it was awesome. The Sunday that he came forward, all those junior high boys, when they whooped him. Whoop, whoop. Yeah, it was awesome. And then when we baptized him, his family was there, and there was a bunch of friends, and there were visitors that were there to witness what he was doing, and so I got to baptize him. You get to see the kid the person, whoever it is, come up out of the water, and they're usually just smiling, and there's somebody, a mom or a dad up there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's and then you look out and you got family members, and afterwards they're just excited. And then in 5 years, I've run into people over the past, decade or whatever it's been, 5, 6, 8 years, and they're like, I said, I think I know you. And we were there when you baptized this. We were there when you did this funeral. We were there when you did this, whatever. And the best thing, I think, is those relationships that revolve around genuine ministry when people's lives are impacted. And people remember that. I may say, how do I know you? They remember.
Yeah.
And that's what's important is there's that connection.
Your faithfulness in pursuing your call that God has placed on your life has definitely impacted a lot of this community and bigger than that. And I think I can see that. That's been a really cool thing to experience with you and alongside you for sure. Yeah. So you have any other free thoughts on
No, I'm going to charge you for the rest of it. No, it's been great. Yeah. We really are blessed to be here. Christy and I are both thankful. We're a part of this. Love the community, love the folks, and really enjoy getting to interact. And I have to remind myself, a lot, like the other day, I know this is free thought. We went to make a hospital. I was getting ready to go make a hospital visit. And I just said, in the back of my mind, I thought, if I don't include Josh in this, I'm foolish, And so it's that, I think that's a blessing. And we went up there. It was just, a short little visit. You got to pray. Who knows? Anyway.
Yeah, and I cherish those moments, and I take those moments. I don't take those moments for granted. I love that I get to be a part of the ministry that you're doing, and I want to learn and go alongside you.
And that's kind of what I have to remind myself of that, because, I'm at this point where I don't have kids in the house and you do. And so in my mind, I thought, okay, if I call him, it's going to take him away from his family, his kids. But if I don't call him, it's going to be a missed opportunity for him to minister to this family and to grow in his ability to serve, because really it's on the job training.
Yeah.
And that's what ministry is.
I was going to say, that's ministry, is on the job training. Every day is going to be different. You never know what's going to happen. If a kid gets hit by a car one day, or he's okay. Everybody knows he's okay. That's why I could say that. But you never know what's going to happen on any given day. And being able to go along and participate in those things with you really trains me for as I grow older and maybe be a senior pastor one day.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's in the cards for me, but whatever's in the cards for me.
Church. Pray for that church.
Whatever's in the cards for me in 20 years. I still may be here as the youth pastor in 20 years. Whatever, I'm going to stay faithful to whatever God has called me to do, and or I may be here 2 more weeks. Who knows?
Yeah. Probably the latter.
Okay, well, we better wrap up this podcast before I get fired. Okay. Yeah. I guess I'll give a family challenge to those who are listening. If you see Donovan, tell him how much you appreciate him. He's not in here for the appreciation, but it's sure good to feel that people are impacted and changed by the work that he's doing. So if you see him, tell him you love him. We'll talk at y'all later.